Final Fantasy III is the second game in the series which didn't get a release outside of Japan for many years. Non-Japanese speaking audiences didn't get to see an official translation of the game until 2006 with the release of the Nintendo DS version of the game, which has since been ported to Steam, mobile and PSP. The game never saw a release outside of Japan because the team was focused on releasing the next game for the Super Nintendo, and as such didn't have time to create a translated version. The game is the first of the series to make proper use of a job system, where you can freely change the class of your characters as you go through the game, which is a system that a few other games in the series will experiment with in the future. The game starts out with one of our main protagonists, Lunaf, falling into a cave after an earthquake, after which he's set upon by monsters before he even knows what's happened. You get forced into your first battle here, and it's here that you probably realise that the music in this game is pretty good. The standard battle theme is really good and incredibly catchy, which is a good thing too because you'll be hearing it very, very often. Battles play out exactly as they have in previous games though, taking it in turns to hit each other and choosing each character's actions before the round starts. So, off to a pretty hectic start, thrown right in there. Although here would be a good time to start with my grievances with this remake as we explore the cave. Firstly, I really don't like how zoomed in the camera is. It makes navigating the dungeons a bit harder as it's harder to see what's up ahead. It becomes more of an issue later on when the dungeons get more complicated, but comparing it to footage from the original game, I think the issue can be made clear. I'm also not 100% sold on the quality of the 3D modelling here, as they're very low poly, but overall I think it adds to the charm of this particular game, and it's not an overall negative in my eyes. Moving on, Lunaf makes his way through the cave and stumbles upon a crystal, where he's attacked by an adamantoise, and this is the best music in the game, hands down. The boss theme in Final Fantasy III is truly awesome, and I could probably listen to it all day and not get bored of it. Defeating the monster allows the crystal to speak to Lunaf and tell him how he has destiny before him. And so he goes back to his hometown and lets his adopted parents know. His mum even makes sure he remembers to save. He meets other protagonists, Ark, Ingus, and Revia on his journey, and they join together to take out the Djinn to lift the ghost curse off the population. It's best to mention here that these main characters are made specifically for this remake, as in the original game they weren't really characters. They spoke, but there was no specific personalities or anything like that. Although it could be argued these guys aren't much different except that they have backstories now and look different from each other. They have about 1 or 2 personality traits each, and outside of the starting area the main characteristics aren't too important to the story being told here. The first dungeon with the Djinn really showcased the weird difficulty spikes in the game. The enemies here utterly kicked my ass until I ground out a few levels, after which I was pretty much good to go, but this won't be the last time there's a spike in difficulty like this. In the cave we meet Princess Sarah, who joins the group as a fifth wheel and assists in fights. You can also speak to her with the push of a button. This goes for a number of characters throughout the game. I like this as they often either provide clues on where to go or what to do, or they provide some sort of lore to the world. A nice addition to the formula for sure. The group comes across the Djinn and we come to another change made with this remake. Bosses hit twice per turn here. I'm not sure what to make of this, as on one hand it certainly increases the difficulty of a fight, but it can also feel pretty unfair when the boss decides to make 2 pretty devastating moves and almost wipes you. Or does wipe you. Or they decide they just really don't like one particular character and double slap them from full HP to dead. So while I appreciate the difficulty somewhat here, I don't like how bad it feels in the moment at times, especially later on. With the Djinn defeated, the group gets teleported to the crystal, who congratulates them and provides them with the first set of jobs. Any character can switch to any of these jobs at any time outside of battle, which is awesome. You can make your party any way you want, and swap up at any time to experiment with different setups. However, the issue I have with this particular iteration of the job system is the job swap sickness that comes when you switch a character's job. When you switch, there's a period when the character's stats are reduced for a certain number of battles, which involves grinding out random encounters to get them back to full efficiency. Where this fails the game is that this actually discourages experimentation due to the punishment of having to grind out battles after switching. A problem that gets worse when job levels get higher and the punishment for swapping is even more battles with reduced stats. The NES version of the game made you spend job points gathered at the end of each battle to switch out jobs, but with no penalty for swapping. That older system to me is actually a lot better, as in both cases you'd be grinding out battles anyway, but in the NES system, at least you would be building a balance of points as you went, and could cash them in when you felt like or required a change. And sometimes the game all but requires you to switch jobs to make meaningful progress. After travelling more of the land, sans one airship due to shenanigans, and meeting an amnesiac named Desh, you need to enter a magical forest of tiny people, and the only way to do it is to be mini. This requires an MP charge to cast a spell on yourselves, and again to be unminied on the other side, and most of the party needs to be casters as physical attacks do subtle damage. This is required a few times, getting through the tiny dungeon to get to the pirate bay, then going through another small dungeon to fight a boss while minied. One dungeon even requires you to inflict the toad status on yourself in order to enter it, basically wasting magic spells to do so. Due to the gimmicky nature of these interactions, the second and third time you need to do these actions starts to wear thin by the time the first part of the game is over. Luckily they don't come up again too often after the first section of the game. Defeating an evil guy named Amor is the final challenge here in this floating tree castle, after which it's revealed that this world is actually a floating continent of a much larger world beneath the fog, and it's all Xandé's fault. Sid reveals that he took the group of orphans to the floating continent as he was fleeing the flood of darkness, which covered over the world and put it all into a time stasis. The music for the real world is really good when you arrive. It's very melancholic, which seems very appropriate for the given situation. The only survivors you find are on a broken ship, one of them being a priestess who succeeded in not allowing the miasma from taking over the world completely. Her music is also very bittersweet sounding, which is definitely writing on the wall for when going to restore the water crystal to restore the world state. She takes a shot from Kraken in order to save the group, killing her in the process. Upon his defeat, the group is swept away in an earthquake and wake up in a town called Amor, where 4 old guys think that they're the warriors of light. Please laugh. And that some dick named Goldor has chained our ship to the bay. The music in town is nice though, at least. Getting out to confront Goldor about this clear misunderstanding, opening up the map reveals that it's not really that big. The world map never really feels daunting, and all objectives on the map seem a reasonable distance away. I actually quite appreciate this condensed approach to the map design, as it means that the game continues at a decent pace. The group gets to Goldor's manor, and lo and behold, everything's gold. Even the enemies are all gold. Not a shock really. Anyway, the group goes to confront Goldmember.
I love gold!
And with him defeated, he breaks the crystal, which I don't remember there being any consequence to, and acquire the key to free the ship. Perhaps the crystal was fake, also made of gold? I don't know. Either way, it's not important, as pretty quickly the ship is shot down while passing over a city in the midst of a civil war. The king's son is trying to find a way to help his father, who seems to have gone a bit mad, and through very subtle hints, it's told to the player that the upcoming boss is going to need dragoons to beat him. By very subtle I mean, of course, not subtle at all. The only weapon shop sells spears exclusively, and you can climb the dragoon tower to acquire a set of dragoon armor for everybody. It's dragoons all the way down. So, go out and grind that job sickness, cause we gotta jump Garuda to death. Bring in the peace nets to the group and sweet new ship which is super fast, meaning that they can travel through the valley with high winds and meet major character Doga, who's some sort of god or ancient precursor race man. It's not too clear, and as with a lot of details in these older games, not too important either. But this is the series' first appearance of Moogles, Kupo. Doga explains that Xandé was made immortal by the great magus Noah, which he wasn't too pleased about, so sought the means to stop the flow of time to spite the memory of the late wizard, leading him to the cloud of darkness. Doga takes us through another mini dungeon, which I just ran through because I didn't want to deal with it, and at the end of it he applies magic to let our ship go underwater. That makes 3 world maps, although this one is significantly more barren. The underwater world has a nice theme to it though, so it makes travelling through there a pleasant experience at least. The Time Temple is the first occurrence of another criticism I have of this game, in that mini-bosses occur frequently as random encounters. These mini-bosses still attack twice a turn like a normal boss too. It's not as bad here, but later in the game this becomes really grating. The battles make you chew through your resources to kill them, and then at the end of the fight you don't really get much rewarded experience either, which is another case of the game sometimes feeling like a pain to get through at times. Finding the loot and awakening Grune really demonstrates the more light-hearted nature of this game's tale though. After the pretty grim events of Final Fantasy II, it's nice to play through this game which doesn't take it all quite so seriously. This moment, as well as allowing the 4-year-old men of light to have so much text dedicated to them, really shows this, and I honestly think it's a big boon for the game. It's an odd little game and I love it for it. Grune leads the group to a massive ancient ship which is capable of flying over the smaller mountains. This unlocks the way to the penultimate dungeon, the Cave of Shadows, or as I affectionately called it the first time, the Cave of Bullshit. Here all the enemies in the random encounters multiply themselves if attacked by normal means, so this means either all casters, or you're forced to equip a couple of Dark Knights. Nothing else is worth it unless you are so overleveled that you're one-shotting the enemies anyway. It's another dungeon in the game that unfortunately has the Henry Ford issue of free to choose any job as long as it's X. It's a boring dungeon on top of that. You've got to wind yourself through samey looking cave rooms along hidden passages. The cave gives you the last MacGuffin needed to make your way to the end, but first Doga and Grune want to throw down to make sure the group is ready, and so begins the actual hardest fight in the game. They hit hard, making this a pretty sizable difficulty spike, but you also fight one after the other with no break, so one mistake leading to a death can be disastrous. It's an issue I found throughout the whole game, which is more an issue with the remake's mechanics, in that one death in a boss fight can be unrecoverable because it quickly becomes impossible to revive and heal quickly enough before a group-wide attack wipes the party. It can be argued this is because the game is supposed to be hard, but it just feels a bit cheap to me most of the time. Defeating the pair, they provide the group the keys to Eureka and the Crystal Tower, so the group heads there, kicks Titan's ass for the access to the best jobs in the game. Plunders Eureka and the Crystal Tower for its loot. And face off against a mirror at the top. Ho ho! A trap! But luckily, Doga's mystical magic of Deus Ex Machina saves the day, by teleporting in people with hearts of pure light to lift the curse. Sound a bit Kingdom Hearts here.
Kingdom Hearts is light. Light.
Xande says it's too late, gets his ass handed to him, then the cloud of darkness shows her face and in a scripted battle defeats the group, demonstrating how powerful she is. I like this use of scripted battles. They demonstrate firsthand through gameplay exactly what you need to know. Experiencing this, there's no shadow of a doubt that Cloud of Darkness is a threat not to take lightly. The group recovers through the power of friendship and so march on into the world of darkness. Which sucks. I hate this part of the game. 50% of the encounters are mini-bosses, and so it's best to just run from them. You also have to fight 4 bosses before getting to the final fight, and all this, plus the whole of the tower you need to do, in one run because there's nowhere to save. It's a good test of endurance though, that's for sure, because if you mess up you have to start all the way at the bottom. Defeating the bosses unlocks the souls of Warriors of Darkness, who held off a flood of light thousands of years ago, and they want to help weaken the main boss for you to beat her. The fight against the cloud itself is great, the music is amazing, and it looks pretty cool too. Or at least as cool as DS level rendering will allow. It's a very challenging fight too that requires everything you've got to take her down. And doing so is a little anticlimactic as you basically just smash cut right to celebrating, taking a tour of the towns you visited and the characters you met along the way. Luckily I was fond of most of them, even if there's not much to say about them as characters. And that's it, that's Final Fantasy III completed. So what did I think about it overall? Overall I enjoyed my time with Final Fantasy III. The story is very light and light-hearted, which as I said earlier is a nice change of pace coming straight off Final Fantasy II. In a way, the story is a retelling of the first game with the whole Four Warriors of Light business and a very find the thing plotline, just that there is a lot more meat to the gathering of the items. It kind of gave the game a feeling of a series of mini episodes in a fantasy TV show, with a weak overarching plot to tie the whole thing together by the end. Certainly not a bad approach to telling a story back in the NES days. The job system I found to be pretty enjoyable too, despite my issues with how it handled job switching. The job switching could make the game more replayable, but when I look back through my time with the game, I find it just isn't the case in the end, as I come to dread the parts where I'm forced to switch to specific jobs. The punishment for switching jobs also greatly discouraged me from mixing things up, so I found a way that worked and then stuck to it, which is why 90% of the footage you'll see is me having the group set up as a knight, a melee warrior like a monk or a dragoon or something like that, and a white mage and a black mage. At this point, I'd actually make the argument that Final Fantasy I is more replayable than this game, especially considering the game's remake. The simplicity of the first also helps in this manner though, I think. This leaves me with the ranking this episode. It stands as follows: number 1, Final Fantasy I, number 2, Final Fantasy III, and number 3, Final Fantasy II. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.